Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third summer 2023 PD series. And our presenter today is Karen Randazzo. And I'm going to turn it over to Karen because it's going to be awesome.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure being with you today. Hopefully, you'll see on your screen right now that there's a welcome sign with a little computer. I'm going to ask you to participate in today's session. I'm so excited to actually instruct you and actually help you put on your student hat to see what it would be like to be a student in my classroom. So if you wouldn't mind going to join.nearpod.com, and you can enter the code CIEWL. And once you get there, you should be able to see 10 ways to ditch those worksheets, a nice title slide there. So I'll give you a moment to do that. If you have any difficulties, let me know. Now, I will say, since today is going to be interactive, you could probably just minimize your screen for the Zoom meeting. Really, all you need on your screen is the Nearpod, because I'll be obviously narrating over the different slides, but this will direct you through everything that you need to access today. At the end of today's session, you absolutely will have some templates and things that you can download and use right away in your classroom. And as always, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to help. So I'm just going to check to see where we're at with the Nearpod, see how many participants we have. So it looks like there's 27 in there.
So
what I'll do
everyone's in yet at this time. So
okay. What I'll do, Kristen, just to make it easier, is I'll put it in the chat
yes,
so
and then I'll
that
copy it. If we have more people show up, I will just keep reposting it in the chat.
Great. Fantastic. So I'll throw this in there. And that will be the access link to make it easier for everybody to get to. All right, so I'm going to change slides here. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm sharing the participant screen. Okay, well, welcome to 10 ways to ditch those worksheets. Before we get started, I always like to take a moment and just say thank you. First and foremost, Kristen and the NEACT, I want to thank you so much for having me. It is my pleasure to share just some ideas that work really well with my student population. I also want to thank all of my Hillsborough colleagues that I work with for always embracing the different things that I want to try in my classroom. And then last but not least, I want to thank you as the participants. Thank you for giving up your precious summer vacation to spend some time with me and hopefully bring some really great innovative ideas back with you into your classroom. Before we get started, I want to formally introduce myself. My name is Karen Randazzo. I am a chemistry teacher at Hillsborough High School in Hillsborough, New Jersey. I have 17 years teaching experience. I'm also the owner of Miss Raz Chem Class LLC. I teach all levels of chemistry, honors, college prep, advanced placement. I'm also my district's turnkey trainer. So one of the things that I love doing besides teaching students is teaching teachers. So I spend a lot of time creating professional development courses and sharing with teachers. My teaching style is, really governed by the NGSS. It's very student-centered. I do have a flipped classroom. I like to incorporate student choice whenever possible in my classroom. And then finally, my favorite tech tools for ditching those worksheets would be Bookit, the QR code generator, and Google Slides. So I wanted to reflect a little bit about what I want you to get out of today's session. So my goal is to inspire you to create more meaningful learning experiences and assessment experiences for your students. And when you have to use worksheets, because I still do, I want you to think about when is the best time to use a worksheet and how your design can really impact student learning. I also want to help you track student progress quickly and easily during class time. And then finally, provide some suggestions for when, where, and how to use each assessment strategy. Before we get started today, I always like to get to know my audience. So when you look at this Nearpod screen, you'll see on the bottom, it says share your thoughts. I'm going to ask you to take a couple of moments. Your name will not be shared. This is completely anonymous. Just tell me a little bit about you. Why do you want to ditch worksheets? Why are you here today? What are you hoping to learn?
Oh, I'm seeing lots of good things coming in here.
Can I ask a quick question? I use Nearpod. What application did you use so that everybody could see all these things at the same time?
To see all the posts on it's a collaborative board. I think that's what you're asking.
Oh, okay. Collaborative board. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Collaborative board is a wonderful tool. I use this a lot whenever I need my students to do any kind of like SEL when you keep things anonymous. And you'll notice one of the cool things about the collaborative board is you can basically keep students from posting. You can approve student posts as they come in. So I always like to wait a little while. You'll notice there was like a little bit of a lag because I find that when students start reading other posts, then they start writing the same thing. So I wanted you to take some time and just think about why you're here, what you hope to get out of this. And we still got some things coming in. So I'm going to give you a moment just to kind of read over some of these. I'm going to look at these too. Yeah. Great. All right, this is some wonderful information. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start today's session with a little bit of, I guess, an anticipatory set. So I am going to select that student plays. If I were in the classroom with you doing this, which I wish I were, but if I were in the classroom with you doing this, I would be playing this on the overhead. So I'm going to select that you can play it yourselves, and I'll give you a moment to play it. If you just click that button in the middle of the screen, you should be able to play it.
Ooh.
Isn't that tough to see? It's definitely, I mean, by all means, like not respectful. And it definitely makes us realize some things about the importance of relationship and the importance of giving quality materials to our students. And so I don't know if you've seen this video before, but it was a viral video. And so this kind of really sets the stage for how students will perceive a lot of the things that we give them. So keeping this video in mind, I want to talk a little bit about this article that was written by Jennifer Gonzalez. I follow Jennifer Gonzalez. I believe she's a former English teacher, and now she educates teachers, and she really differentiates between the busy sheet and the power sheet. So in the case of this student in the video, more than likely he was realizing like, okay, she's giving us busy sheets packets, right? Frickin' packets. So typically the busy sheet is classified as a low-level recall-based work. Anytime you have any kind of fill in the blanks, labeling things, word searches, oh boy, word scrambles. If you're having students color, yes, sometimes that's necessary because it is relaxing, but if it really doesn't add a whole lot of layer of understanding, then that's usually classified as the busy sheet. You can take your busy sheets and convert them into power sheets. And so the way that you could potentially do that is by making sure that that worksheet, whatever you're giving your students, is directly supporting student learning. So graphic organizers are wonderful if you're providing data for students to analyze. Maybe you're assigning a project and you give a project planning sheet. Any kind of reflection tool, note-taking template, or data collection tool are all described as power sheets. So the purpose of this session today is to really introduce some ideas and things that you could bring back to your classroom and introduce some things that I do in my classroom instead. But again, I use worksheets. I absolutely do. So please don't feel every single activity that you're seeing in today's session is something that I do on a daily basis. There are times when worksheets are necessary. So after watching that video, after thinking about why you're here today, I want to engage you in your very first strategy for ditching worksheets. The first one is a thinking routine. So I want you to think about for a moment, what thoughts about ditching worksheets makes you want to, for example, stop in your tracks, right? Makes you really not want to ditch worksheets. Think about something that maybe makes you want to slow down from ditching worksheets, and then think about something that wants you to speed up and do it. So on the next slide, I created this basically like a paperless version of a thinking routine. And so I'm going to give you a moment to take a couple of those Post-it notes, and you'll see that you can click and drag the Post-it note. You can move them around. I'm just going to ask you to pull over a Post-it note, write your answer, and then drag it onto the light. So you do have editing rights, as you can see. And so if you were in my classroom, how this would work is I would have the traffic light actually projected on my screen. I would give my students, a red Post-it note, a yellow Post-it note, and a green Post-it note, and they would be taking those Post-it notes, writing down their reflections and answers, and then getting up and putting it on the actual traffic light. But if you're a paperless school, you prefer to using paperless resources, it is possible to use that. So to create this, I just used a Google slide. I wasn't entirely sure like how many participants there would be. So you'd probably see that this looks pretty tiny, and it's just because, again, I wasn't sure how many there would be, and I just wanted you to have enough space. But these thinking routines are amazing for giving students the ability to connect to the concepts that you're learning in class, reflect on the ideas that you're presenting. And all of these things are going to be provided to you at the end of the session. So if you wanted to use these for the future, you absolutely could.
Oh, I can think of lots of ways to use this.
Yeah. And it could even be, in just of thinking about, the new learning, right? If you're teaching a concept or skill, what piece of learning is really difficult for you? What piece of learning maybe do you feel really comfortable with? So you can definitely modify this to meet your needs. Yellow could be like, what one question do you still have? So there's a lot of things that you could say. So just in the interest of time, I just thought I would kind of show you how I would use a thinking strategy in my class. But now what we're going to do is dive a little bit deeper into these thinking strategies and how I use them. So the first thing is there is a book, but you really don't need to buy it because all of these thinking routines are available from Project Zero. For me, I use thinking routines whenever I want my students to think about content in a new way, reflect on their knowledge, or really link their pre-existing knowledge. Um, Usually I start my school year with a thinking routine, which I'll show you an example of momentarily. But you can use a lot of these strategies whenever you're starting a brand new unit, whenever you want to reflect on new content that you've already taught, you want to promote sense making in your classroom and some social emotional learning. So I'll show you some examples of these, some artifacts from my classroom and how I use them. One thing I do want to note is that one of the amazing things about this website, which again will be linked for you, is that you can sort the thinking routines based on your content area. So, so notice in that image that you see on the bottom right, that's the website, but then that filter is what you can use, which is located just a little bit below the website. So this is the web page. If you click on that blue box, that will take you to the web page, but it will be linked in a summary document that I've created for you, and I'll share with you a little bit later, but feel free. This is your professional development session. If you want to click on that and just start browsing, by all means. But for me, what I thought would be beneficial was for you to see, like, what does this actually look like in the classroom? So the first one that I use in the beginning of the school year is compass points. So a PDF popped up on your screen. I love compass points. I use this a lot for a lot of the PD that I teach, actually, but whenever I'm introducing something new, I want my students or participants to think about what makes you excited about this idea, what worries you about it, what else do you need to know, and then what, as of right now, is your stance on this. So in the beginning of the school year, I introduced this idea of the flipped classroom and what our classroom environment is going to be like. And so I use compass points to do just that. So I, introduce the flipped classroom, what our daily drill is going to be each day. And then I create a Jamboard where I ask them to look at, how they're feeling. So basically it's kind of a way to feel the temperature in the room. What else do they feel that they need to know about the classroom? That's really good for me because then I can share that information with the students if there's still some lingering questions, what makes them excited about it, what's their stance about the flipped classroom, and what makes them worried. So this was an artifact from my classroom. Here's another one. This is from professional development that I taught. So when I use this with teachers, I also like to do this. So this is an option if you didn't want to do a paperless version. I do have a Cricut and I use it frequently, and I did make that little compass rose. But I do like to use the post-it notes, and that way it gets the students up and moving. So I do tend to do that. So that's, if you didn't want to do a paperless version, you could do that. Okay, so this is another one that I use in my class, specifically with phenomena-based instruction whenever I'm starting a new unit. So see, think, and wonder is exactly what it sounds like. You know, what do the students see? What do they think about it? What does it make you wonder? So this is really good whenever you're trying to give some sort of discrepant event, something that's unexpected. You know, would be a great thing to use. You can also modify these thinking routines. So here's an example of a phenomenaling experience that my students did. And so how I modified that see, think, wonder was more kind of geared towards reflection. So we basically started the unit, the students created these models, right? And there's no post-it notes. The white that you're seeing is I just covered up students' names to keep it a little bit more anonymous. But we started our unit, the student made the models. I showed them, you know, the conductivity tester lights up when I put it in salt water, but not in sugar water. You know, what do you think's happening? And then as the unit progressed, they learned more about ionic substances and covalent substances. And then at the end of the unit, I gave them this prompt where I asked them to use different colored post-it notes to correct any inaccuracies in their model, to explain something in more detail based on what they learned over the course of the unit, and to use a blue post-it note for any questions that they still might have. So those are questions that I would be able to answer in class, for example, or at least help my students find the answer to those questions. So I think the thinking routines are great because they can really inspire you to think about ways that you can modify them to meet your needs. The second strategy that is probably the most simplistic out of all of the strategies that I'm going to show today is take your current worksheet and convert it into a task list. And I've talked about this before if you've been following me. Take those questions that are on your worksheet and literally just copy and paste it. This is wonderful for, you know, practicing skills, scaffolding. You can do the drill and kill type of thing, solving multi-step problems. This is perfect for partner work. The students are always whiteboarding with partners. So what does this look like? So here's what it looks like. So I went to Home Depot, created whiteboards. I believe it's just like a laminate type of material. They sell it in huge sheets. It is a 2x3 size, and you know, whiteboard markers. And then every student will spread out with those whiteboards. They are big enough for the students to split them in half. You could have, you know, one student working on either side of the whiteboard, or you could have students taking turns. I believe that learning is very much an active process. So I prefer the former, where the students are splitting the whiteboard in half and both working the same problem at the same time. And then they can compare if they got the same answer. What you see on the right-hand side is how I formatively assess the students. So you can see there's the task list, and then on the left-hand side of that is the formative assessment. So let's dive deeper a little bit into the formative assessment. So the idea is, at least with worksheets, is we want the students to know what they don't know, and we want to know what they don't know. So this formative assessment sheet that I've created allows me to see exactly how my students are progressing through the problems. It really encourages accountability during class time, in that as your students complete the problems, you're checking off that they are completing them with accuracy. If they're not completing them with accuracy, or they're really struggling, then I don't give a check, and that usually indicates that they need to work on that. At the top there, you'll see that answers are provided to make it a little bit easier for me to, you know, grade their work and see that they're doing it correctly. But these grades are all formative. It does not numerically impact the student marking period grade at all. So even though, for example, there are 7 questions, you know, if a student earns a 5 out of 7, it's not the end of the world. It's just a check-in to see where they're at. And this really, like, you know, while the students are all working, this really keeps students on task, because you're walking around with a clipboard and really documenting what they're doing. The third strategy, again, to help get away from worksheets, make it a little bit more active, is multiple choice mania. This is something that I use a lot more with my AP classes, but it's definitely something that I plan to incorporate a lot more with my honors class. I find at this point in my career, so many of my questions are open-ended that my students don't, at least in the honors class and the CP classes, they don't have as much practice with multiple choice. So that is my goal for this year, to definitely include this strategy a lot more with my kids. But with multiple choice mania, the idea is that your students can engage with multiple choice questions all around the classroom. So I create these typed up and laminated cards, and I post them all around the room. I post them on these things called sticky clips that do not damage your walls. There's like a waxy material behind them, and you just stick them and you can take them off. Very easy, doesn't damage your walls at all. And I just kind of put the cards all around the room. The kids get up, they look for them. They usually bring their Chromebooks with them, because we are a one-to-one district, and they'll scan that QR code. But I coach them. I say, look, it's expected that you're going to read the question on the card. And then once you answer the question, then you can scan the QR code, because it really doesn't make much sense for you to just read the question and scan the QR code because you haven't done any of the legwork to actually see if you understand the content. And I think now's a good time to really talk about, like, it is important, I think, to share the why with your students. Like, why do you want them to do this? Why will this help them? And so I always spend a lot of time with my kids, like explaining to them, like, why do I feel that it's important to do it this way? And so I feel like when you do that, it really helps to promote buy-in. So keeping that in mind, one of the major things about, the multiple choice mania is I love the fact that students get immediate feedback. They know whether or not they know the information right away. Same thing with the whiteboarding. That's the ultimate goal, because if your kids are, doing a worksheet outside of class, I guess you'd have to collect it to see if they really know what they're doing. But even then, like, you don't know if they're sitting down with their tutor, or like somebody who's, who had the homework done and they're just copying. And I saw, some of the participants were writing about students copying homework. Yeah, that doesn't help anybody. So by doing this stuff in class, it's a more authentic assessment, and you can see what your students actually know. And you may say, Karen, do you write all of these questions? The answer is absolutely not. Some I do, but a lot of them I don't. You can get some really great multiple choice questions from test banks, from past Regents exams, even AP Classroom. And this is how I use a lot of them, even with the teacher use, because as long as you're keeping it in the classroom, and not posting on the internet, that's fair game. Obviously make sure your students are taking pictures of it, but you can absolutely use that with your kids. Another one of my faves, FRQ speed dating. This is a lot of fun. I don't use this a lot, but I use it whenever I feel like I want to mix it up a little bit, mix up the partners and the groups and stuff. The students tend to kind of form their cliques at times, so I want to kind of mix it up a little bit. So what I do with FRQ speed dating is I use, just like it sounds like, you're going to be using this with free response questions with multiple parts, multiple open-ended sections. So the idea is that the students will pair up with a partner of their choosing to have their first date with. And then you set a timer on the overhead projector for the students to see exactly how much time is left. So I do 5-minute intervals. The students work the problem for 5 minutes together. Usually students have like 2 different colored markers, so I can kind of see like who's doing the work. At the end of 5 minutes, the students have to stop. The problem will not be done, that's for sure, but they have to stop wherever they are. One student goes clockwise, the other one goes counterclockwise. So they end up with a new partner and a new board. They are allowed to make changes to, the questions that they're seeing on the board. So if they're like, oh, that doesn't look right, they can absolutely make changes to that. But I usually repeat this process anywhere from like 3 to 4 times, depending on the length of the question. But you can see the setup is really, really simple. I just, this I laminate as well. I'm a compulsive laminator. But I can use them year after year, so that's why I like to do it. And then obviously when you laminate, it makes it easier to take the masking tape off too. So I'll laminate them, tape them down on the desk, and I set up a whiteboard all around the room in a big circle, and then the students are able to just rotate and mingle with their dates.
And each pair has the same question?
Yes. Yes, each pair has the same question. Yeah, that's a great question. Another fun thing that I like to do, again, to mix things up a bit, is like cut and paste activities. You'll probably say, why are you coloring that? Doesn't add any layer of, understanding. And that's true, but sometimes, coloring can be relaxing for students. So I did opt to color this. But whenever I can, I like students to manipulate things. And I thought for naming and formula writing, seeing how things fit together would be really good for students. So how I use the cut and paste is usually the students are creating models and analyzing those patterns in the data that they've constructed. So the idea with this cut and paste is that you're going to have to create a template for the students to actually like paste the cards onto. I also create sorting manipulatives, which include correct and incorrect answers. So not all of those are obviously used on this one. And then I break the activity down like piece by piece. So like, part one, part two, part three, so that my students can really just focus on a single skill. If you're going to end up doing a cut and paste activity, my suggestion would be that you check to make sure that your students have answered the things correctly. They've put their pieces correctly before they glue anything, because that's when, they get a lot of mistakes. But this is very effective whenever you want your students to, like I said, construct meaning from data, and it's, low stakes because the students are usually doing it with a partner. And it's a lot of fun. It just helps to kind of mix things up a bit. So here's a couple of artifacts. So I use this with calculating atomic mass, and the correct atomic the correct mass is provided, molar mass, excuse me, the correct molar mass. And then they can just use their tiles to kind of cut and paste them in there, indicate how many they need. And then naming and formula rating, I already showed that. And you can see like on the right hand side of the naming and formula rating one, there are questions provided for the students that they can answer. So again, it gives them, they construct the model and then they answer questions about the model. So it really helps to drive a lot of those points home. And then while they're working on this, and with all of these strategies, while they're doing these things, like I'm just walking around looking to see how I can help student groupings. Like that's really my goal. So I really move from, being that sage on the stage to now the facilitator and helper and coach for my students. Okay, so brain break. Tell me right now, what is your favorite strategy so far? I'll share the results with you momentarily. I'm just giving everybody a moment to answer. All right, so maybe there might be some connectivity issues, but I'll share what I have so far. Here we go. So it looks like, wow, well, we have some no answers, but that's okay. But it looks like speed dating is in the lead here. Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad. I'm glad that you found something valuable there. Yeah, that is a lot of fun. Definitely mixes things up for sure. It helps to provide a lot of like new perspectives too with the students working with different groups. So it's nice. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about Book It. Book It's a lot of fun. My students love it. There are so many games. It's just like a game within a game. It's a lot of fun for students to play. And so this is one way to gamify your instruction. And again, get that assessment quickly and easily, right? It's self-grading. You can do multiple choice questions. You can do fill in the blank type questions. You can assign it as homework if your students want extra practice. A lot of times we'll play it in class and the students will be like, can you assign this on Google Classroom so I can play it later? And it's like, of course, absolutely. It's so easy to create games with Book It. You can import from any Quizlets that have been made. You can use a CSV file. I've done the Quizlet strategy, and I've also edited like existing games. So similar to like quizzes, you can edit existing games that are there. There are so many different scenarios and games. Some games are all about, like, for example, the Gold Quest is speed and luck. This is kind of nice, especially if you have those underdog students who maybe struggle in the class, they could still win. So that's kind of fun for them. Um, but then if you wanted to go for more like speed and accuracy, the racing game is a lot of fun for students. And I thought just to be a little fun, I thought we could play a game really quick. I'll show you. So this is an emoji riddles game. I'll share it with you. I'm going to push it out via the Nearpod. Hopefully this works. Let's see. Let me know if it doesn't. Ta-da! So you should be able to click on that webpage, and I set it for 2 minutes. I'm going to see if anybody joins here. Ah, we got one. All right. Fantastic. So it's just a quick 2-minute game, a little brain break, but you can kind of see what it's like if you've never played this before. It's a lot of fun for kids and for you, I'm sure, too. I have about 21 of you in there. Maybe what I'll do is I'll share the screen too, so you can see what that looks like. Okay. All right, I'm going to click start. Thank you for joining. So as you play this game, this is usually something that I will post on the overhead projector. Sometimes I join and I'll play against the students, which is always kind of fun. They always try to steal my gold and beat me. And you have the option of setting it for time, or you can set it for like if a certain amount of money has been reached. So there's a lot of choices. You're doing pretty well with those emojis. We've got 44 seconds. Who's it gonna be? It's like Hens is on top. Bell is not that far away. All right, it's almost there. Uh-oh, it says something went wrong. I don't know if you're able to play it or not. Were you able to play it? No. Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, it's okay. But like I said, like hopefully it would work a little bit better in your classroom. But this is something that I use with the kids, and they enjoy it because it just mixes things up. Sometimes when my kids come in, their bell work will be to engage in just like a quick look at game, and the kids always get excited because it has music and it's cute and whatnot. So let me share the other screen. Okay. Well, thank you for your participation. I'm going to close that activity. There we go. But it's great because, like I said, you can just grab and go different games and whatnot that are already provided to you. One of my other ways to engage students that I absolutely love is through station learning. It just provides variety. And students spend so much time sitting, and I really want them to be up and moving. And so this is wonderful, especially from a differentiation perspective. If you have limited equipment and materials, this is a really great strategy to use with your kids. So for stations, I love to incorporate the use of choice. It really gives the students to have a little bit more autonomy for their learning. They can make choices in terms of the types of activities that they want to engage in. So I will do a set of stations for like different FRQ based questions, like with my AP classes. I'll do a different set of stations for like, different chemical reactions, writing net ionic equations. There's so many different things. The possibilities are really endless, but all of these things really allow the students to choose. Like if you know that this station is about, let's say, modeling, and this station is more like a reading comprehension station, the students can choose what they want to work on. So usually I would have as many as like 5 to 6 stations set up, but I'll say you only have to do 3. And then that's all they're required to do. The materials for the other stations, can be provided to them, like online on my Google Classroom, my Google site, but it's absolutely not required because they're all going to get the practice that they need. And so, I provide obviously the station resources, but I also provide a like printout as some sort of like handout. Usually they're half sheets that the students can write their answers on, share their answers. I will provide answer keys using a QR code, or I will, review the answers to the questions as a whole class. So I'll provide the answer key that way. So I think for this one, I ended up using just the scoring guidelines and, showing it up on the overhead projector and, providing it on my Google site as well. So here's some examples of artifacts from my classroom. So these are some, like I said, FRQ based questions, but I've used them with lab stations and other things, and again having different reading stations, and there's so many different things that you can do. But the idea is that you want students to make choices. So I will show the students like what each station refers to. Like for example, in the upper left-hand corner, that's really assessing London dispersion forces, right, and intermolecular forces. And the bottom right there, obviously you have to rank. So if students have difficulties ranking, the strength of intermolecular forces, they may want to choose that station. So I always try to start out what I'm doing by saying like, here's what the stations are. And I'll kind of post that on the overhead projector or maybe on the agenda slide for the day. That way the students can make those choices. The eighth way, we're almost there. The eighth way that I ditch worksheets is by using something called Tarsia. And if you've been, again, following me for a while, you know that I use Tarsia a lot with my students. Tarsia is a wonderful resource, especially if you, again, want to give your students some manipulatives. Really, this is just a program, it's freeware, that allows you to create jigsaw puzzles. You can create like domino games. Card sorts, they do have a card sorting feature, and then they have discussion circles that you can use as well. I would say for me, in chemistry, it makes the best use of like matching based questions. That's just how I feel. But you can make them in all different shapes and sizes. You can easily differentiate by making it more difficult by, putting the wrong answers on the perimeter of the puzzle. You can vary the number of pieces. They have very large puzzles, very small pieces. And then one thing is there's different shapes. So you could not disclose what the shape is going to be at the end of the puzzle. So that's another thing that you could potentially do to make it a little bit more difficult. Number 9 is a little bit more labor intensive, I would say, similar to anything with the task cards, which I'll talk about in a moment, and then the multiple choice mania. But with the concept mapping card sort, you have to create these like pre-made cards for the students to sort. So it does take some time on your end, but instead of the students saying, are we going to have a study guide on this assessment? You can say, well, you're going to create your study guide right now. And so this is one of my favorite ways to review for assessments. So what I do is I provide my students some pre-made descriptors and terminology. And the students have to sort those descriptors and terminology. They kind of have to like look at all of the different cards. And this allows them to see what information they have, and they have to decide how to best organize it. But it doesn't stop there. Besides organizing it and classifying that information, they also have to show connections between content. So, like, how do these things relate to each other? Like, why is this unit, for example, on atomic structure? How does, like, the history of the atom relate to atomic structure, ions, isotopes, right? All of these things. So, the concept mapping is a wonderful way for the students to take all the information they've learned after a unit and put it all together. And one of the things that I do with these concept mapping cards words is I embed questions in them as well. So, like, for example, in my unit on atomic structure, we're also doing like atomic mass calculations and looking at protons, neutrons, electrons, calculating the mass number, right? All of those things. So for that, I provide a lot of like sample questions within the concept map so that students have the ability to not only just organize the ideas, but also practice the content as well and see how they're doing with that. So as far as the materials that you would need like larger poster paper, like 3M has like pretty large poster paper. You could also use, like I had on the previous slide, like pretty large, I guess it's like, it's kind of construction paper. Yeah, I like lost my words, teacher brain in the summer. Construction paper. But they would need scissors and a glue stick, and then they can just start assembling. There is a paperless option that you could potentially create, similar to how we were doing the visible thinking strategies. I'll show you what that looks like. Again, it's up to you. Personally, I'm a pen and paper girl, so I really like to use it, but this is what a paperless option would look like should you choose to do it. So you can see on the left-hand side, there's your directions. And then on the left-hand side below it, where you see terminology and descriptors, the students can like click and drag these things to the different portions so they can like move things around and start matching these things up. So, feel free to move these around if you want, but it allows the students to, again, construct their concept map. I mean, it's tough for students to be able to construct their own concept map from scratch. They don't know what to include. So by doing some of the legwork and including some of these terminologies and descriptors, it's a great thing. But you can also, like, if you've got different levels of students in your class, you could hold back the terminology and have the students, based on the descriptors, decide what that terminology is. Or alternatively, you could give the terminology, but maybe they need to come up with the descriptors and examples. So there's a lot that you can do with this type of activity. All right, we're doing pretty good with time. Number 10, one of my faves too. Again, review at the end of a unit, task cards. Task cards are wonderful. Again, easily differentiate for your kids. Incorporate some metacognitive strategies by having your students reflect on the content that they've learned. Task cards are also wonderful because once you have them, you can take them out anytime. You can review for a final exam, right? I call it Final Exam Review Friday. You can pop those out and you can have them use that, maybe as like a do now or a bell work. So I absolutely love these task cards. Again, they take a little bit of time to create, but I think it's worth it because you can reuse it. So similar to the multiple choice mania, they're provided questions in advance. They are given a blank answer sheet similar to what I've provided to you on the right-hand side there. Students record their work and their final answers. Each color of the card represents a specific skill. So I have to get in a little bit further here, but it looks like, for example, the teal cards focused on drawing Lewis structures, and yellow was specific to properties and naming of covalent compounds. So each color represents a skill. They rank their comfort level with that skill, answering questions about that. And based on their rankings, I say to them, you want to spend time answering questions that you don't know how to answer, questions that you feel the least comfortable with answering. I mean, we all want to answer questions that we know how to answer. It feels good, but our focus should be on the stuff that you're really struggling with. And so, again, sharing the why. So this is just a wonderful strategy to again, not overload students with practice, right? You don't want to give students 30 questions to answer, especially if they already know how to do it. If they already know how to, write the names for compounds, why would you give them more practice with that? They don't really need it. So it really helps the students to, again, engage themselves, more autonomy for their learning, make choices for their learning. But I will tell you, I still have those students that want to do every single task card. You write it, Miss Raz, I'm doing it. But that's just how they are. And I can relate. You probably can sense some type A. So, but it's just not the best use of class time, right? I'm not going to be at home with them, teaching with them and working with them. They don't have access to their peers at home. So this really allows us to make sure that the students are working on things that they feel, the least comfortable with, where I can help them. So what does this look like? There are my students from this year. I miss them. But this is what it looks like. The students are just kind of like walking around the classroom, looking for the cards, working at the lab stations, right? The lab stations aren't for just lab. I wipe them down in between labs, so it's nice and clean for the students to work on. There's a large library of questions to answer. Students will survey the questions, pick them up and say, oh, I don't know how to answer this question. Let me take this back to my seat and I'll work it. So students can work together like you're seeing in the photo there, or they can bring it back to their seat and then they just put them back when they're finished with it. The answer key is provided. I don't know if you saw in the prior slide, 2 slides prior, I think it was I'll just go back. There's a QR code where the students can access those. I don't provide those right away. I kind of give students a chance to answer the question. That's, again, we want them to do some of the heavy lifting. So that's kind of what I do. Okay. So I have talked a lot today and shared a lot of artifacts with you. So what are the takeaways from today's session? Use worksheets as a chance for differentiation. Make them available as resources for your kids. If they say, Miss R, I need extra practice on this, right? Have it available. Teach students to take what they need, right? Similar to like we were seeing with the task cards, right? They have choices for what they can do, right? With the stations, they have choices for what they can do. Inspire them to take what they need. Offer choices whenever possible to review content, as well as the amount of practice required. Your students don't need to sit down and do 30 of the same questions. Some students may need to get to where they want to be, but not all students need that. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. The other thing that I want to, which I haven't talked too much about, but all of these examples are all formative. There's no summative assessments here. If the purpose is practice with content, it should not really be graded to numerically impact a student's marking period grade, right? That summative assessment really needs to come after all of these strategies that you're using with your kids. If you're grading it for points, it's not practice. So that's another thing to consider. Power sheets, right? Whenever possible, use those, especially if you have a substitute. Use it as an opportunity for students to, again, graphically organize information, maybe watch a video, create their own concept map. I mean, there's so many things that you can do. And then a lot of times from teachers, which I can relate with 32 kids in a class, worksheets are really just good for crowd control. I get that. I absolutely do. But one strategy that's worked very well for me is splitting my class in half. So maybe like one half of my students are up and moving and working in the lab area on a lab, whatever it might be. And then the other students are working on maybe watching a video or something else, or maybe doing a reading. I use Chem Matters a lot in my classes. That's a great way to kind of give students some context with what they're learning. And then finally, just like I started with you today, utilize bell work time, not necessarily as a chance to give the students a worksheet. Instead, provide some sort of anticipatory set for the students to work through. So with that said, I want to thank you so much for your time. I am absolutely available for questions. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me for questions. I am happy to help. This next slide here will be access to all of the different resources that I've shared with you today. If you click that blue box, it'll allow you to access a summary document where it says any ACT presentation. That'll summarize all the ways, because I know I talked so much today, all the ways that I attempt to ditch worksheets.
That was so awesome, Karen. I have so many
Thank you.
ideas now. Because I use a lot of different strategies, but some of the, like now I have like, ooh, what if I tried?
There are some questions in the chat. Do you want me to answer them now or?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I love the comments. I have to go back and read these, but I will go to the questions now. For every station, there was a question, are they the same or different? So they are different questions. Thanks, Sean, for adding that. Concept mapping could be. Yeah, you could absolutely do a magnetic board. Absolutely. And I guess have students take pictures of it. I always like them to have it as a reference, and then they can use it to study for like a final exam too. Those concept mapping boards. Roberta, I'm happy to give you whatever links you want, but the links might already be in that document that I shared. So if you take a look, but if there's anything else that you want, I'm happy to share. Thank you, Beth. That's really nice. I'm glad you were able to take some information away. Yeah, so you know, my goal as an educator is to share as much as possible, but if you are interested in purchasing some of the resources, that's fine. I'm happy to share them with you. You just send me an email. Thank you, Livia. That's really nice. And Terry. All right. Oh, yep. So hopefully Kathleen, I answered your question about the Google Drive information. Wonderful, Paula. Awesome. Yeah. So there was a question about creating Tarsia puzzles. So some people have, it's not, I don't think it works on Mac. So that's why I included a template. So you can use the templates that I've created for you, or you could absolutely use the Tarsia program, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't work on Mac. So I have a PC. So, but yes, you can absolutely download it. It is completely free. It's freeware. And Roberta just followed up with what document? The document in the Nearpod screen that says click here to open web page. There's a document that says any ACT presentation, 10 ways to ditch those worksheets. I've summarized all the different ways that I have ditched worksheets in my classroom. That's wonderful. And Roberta, I'm happy to share. If you're not in the Nearpod, that's totally fine. I'm happy. I don't know, Kristen, are they able to access the link someplace else?
We could send out a email. If you send it to me, I could send out an email
Sure.
to the website to people who registered for the session.
Okay, yeah, no, that would be absolutely fine. And then Kathleen followed up with, how do these work in college classrooms, mostly freshmen? I would imagine they'd work the same way as they do with my students. And remember, I use these strategies with my AP kiddos too. So I would think that this would be a wonderful strategy, especially when paired with the flipped classroom, you know, like engaging your students in something outside the classroom, then they can come in and demonstrate what they've learned is really the format of my classroom. So.
Oh, that's a good question from Jerusha.
That is a wonderful question. Yeah. So without the use of worksheets, they have still so many things to study from, right? All the task cards are still posted on my Google site. They can go back and work on them anytime they want, right? The booklet is assigned as homework. They can go back and they can engage with the booklet if they want. Their concept maps, while I do store them in the class because it's like usually pretty large, I encourage the students to take a picture of them and then they can study that. So there are definitely ways to get around that with the speed dating, right? Students take a pic of that, you know, and all of these resources I post on my Google site for the students to access. So it's kind of like a buffet. They can choose, you know, what they feel they want to go back to.
Right. This has just been great. I hope everyone else found it to be as useful as I did. I do want to suggest that if you found it useful, please consider joining NEACT. Karen was gracious enough to do the presentation in our other summer PD series events that we're offering at no cost. but although we're a not-for-profit, we do have costs, and your membership helps us to continue offering PD events to people online. And so we do really encourage you to join at neact.org. Jerusha, did you want to say anything more?
No, I think you've got it, but thanks again for everybody coming. And thank you guys so much for presenting this.
I'm going to